David Hamilton was a very successful black-skinned man. He had worked hard to become a billionaire, and now he was proud of all he had achieved. After a long week, he decided to treat himself to a peaceful dinner at a fancy restaurant called Blue Moon. It was one of the best places in the city, known for its elegance and for being where the richest people dined. David had heard a lot about the restaurant, and he thought it would be a nice place to relax. He dressed nicely in a well-tailored suit and polished shoes, hoping to enjoy his evening without any problems. He was sure he looked just as good as anyone else who came there. But when David walked up to the door, something unexpected happened. The doorman, a tall man with a stern face, stopped him. "Sorry, sir, but you can't enter," the doorman said coldly. David was confused. He looked at his clothes, then at the doorman. He knew he was dressed properly, like everyone else who went to the restaurant. He asked, "Is there a problem with my outfit?" The doorman didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked David up and down before repeating, "Sorry, you can't come in." David stood there for a moment, feeling a mix of surprise and anger. He couldn't believe what was happening. It wasn't like he had come in wearing something casual or inappropriate. His clothes were sharp and stylish, but there was something about him, about the way he looked, that the doorman didn't like. David took a deep breath. He had faced challenges before, but this felt different. He had worked so hard to get to where he was. He had earned his place among the city's elite. But here, at this restaurant, it seemed like none of that mattered. David paused for a second, trying to understand what had just happened. He didn't want to make a scene, but the way the doorman had treated him hurt. It wasn't just about being stopped at the door. It was about feeling like he wasn't welcome, even though he had the money, the success, and the status. As he turned away, David's mind started to race. This wasn't just a one-time incident. He realized that the world was not always fair to him. Even though he had everything people said they wanted, it still didn't always give him a place at the table. He knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger issue, one that he had to face head-on. David didn't like feeling small, but in that moment, that's exactly how he felt. The frustration was already starting to grow inside him. He had worked too hard, fought too many battles to be ignored and judged for things he couldn't change. As David walked away from the restaurant, he realized that what had just happened wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just about a man in a suit. It was about something deeper. It was about the system. It was about racism. The kind of racism that wasn't always obvious but was always there, ready to show itself when you least expected it. David Hamilton wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to let this restaurant or anyone else make him feel like he didn't belong. He had earned his success, and now he would fight to make sure everyone else knew it too. David Hamilton stood outside Blue Moon, still trying to process what had just happened. As he turned to leave, faint voices from the doorway caught his attention. He paused, his sharp ears picking up the words clearly despite the low tone. "People like him don't belong here," one voice said with a cruel chuckle. Another joined in, just as harsh. What was he even thinking, showing up here? This isn't his kind of place. David's chest tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The words weren't just rude, they were meant to hurt, to put him down. The staff and some of the regulars had made up their minds about him without knowing anything about him. He looked back at the restaurant, his anger rising. All his life he had faced challenges, but this was different. This was open disrespect, and it stung deeply. For a moment, he thought about walking away and leaving it behind, but something inside him refused. He had come here to enjoy a nice evening, and he wasn't going to let them rob him of his dignity. David squared his shoulders and walked back to the entrance. He asked to speak to the manager, his voice calm but firm. The doorman didn't even bother to hide his annoyance. "The manager is busy," he said without looking at David. David kept his cool. "I'll wait," he said. "It's important." Minutes passed and nobody came. David stood there watching as other diners were greeted warmly and ushered inside. It was clear they had no intention of letting him speak to anyone in charge. Finally, David decided to approach the front desk himself. The hostess looked startled but quickly regained her composure. "I'd like to speak with the manager," David repeated, his voice steady. The woman hesitated, then muttered something into her earpiece. Within moments, 2 large security guards appeared. One of them stepped forward, blocking David's path. "Sir, I think it's time for you to leave," the guard said firmly. David looked at the man, then at the others watching nearby. Their faces were filled with curiosity, some even amusement, as if they were waiting for him to cause a scene. He felt the humiliation wash over him again, stronger this time. "I'm not here to cause trouble," David said, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "I just want to speak to someone in charge, that's all." The guards didn't respond. Instead, they moved closer, their intentions clear. They weren't going to let him stay. Reluctantly, David took a step back. He knew when a fight wasn't worth it, at least not at that moment. As he walked away, escorted by the guards, he could hear soft laughter and whispers behind him. The sting of those words stayed with him, cutting deeper with every step. Back in his car, David sat silently for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His mind raced as he replayed everything that had happened. The disrespect, the sneers, the way they had dismissed him as if he didn't matter. David had always believed in hard work and fairness. He thought his success and accomplishments would earn him respect. But tonight had shown him a harsh truth. No matter how much he achieved, there would always be people who judged him by the color of his skin and not by the man he was. But David wasn't the kind of man who stayed down. The humiliation he felt began to shift into something stronger: determination. He wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to let people like them think they could get away with treating him or anyone else like this. This wasn't just about a bad evening or a ruined dinner. It was about something much bigger, something that had been wrong for far too long. David promised himself he would make sure the world saw what places like Blue Moon truly stood for, and this time he wasn't going to back down. As David drove away, a plan began to form in his mind. This was just the beginning. He wasn't going to let them win. David sat in his quiet office, staring out the window. The night at Blue Moon replayed in his mind, each moment more frustrating than the last. He couldn't stop thinking about the way they had treated him, as if all his success meant nothing. But anger wasn't going to solve anything. He needed a clear plan. He picked up his phone and called Marcus, his closest friend. Marcus had been with him through all the ups and downs, and David knew he would understand. "Hey, Marcus," David said when his friend answered. "I need to talk. Something happened tonight." "What's wrong?" Marcus asked. His voice was calm but full of concern. David explained what had happened at the restaurant. He described the doorman's attitude, the rude comments, and how they had refused to let him speak to the manager. He shared how the humiliation had stung. When David finished, there was a pause. "I know exactly what you're feeling," Marcus said softly. "I've been through it too. No matter what you achieve, some people still see you as less. It's like they're waiting to remind you you're not welcome." David nodded even though Marcus couldn't see him. "That's exactly it," he said. "It doesn't matter how much money I have or how successful I am. To them, I'll always be an outsider." Marcus sighed. "It's a harsh truth, man. You can climb as high as you want, but some doors are still locked, and they're not giving you the key." They talked for a while, sharing stories about similar experiences. Marcus told David about times he had been overlooked or dismissed, even when he was the most qualified person in the room. "It's exhausting," Marcus said. "We shouldn't have to keep proving ourselves over and over." David leaned back in his chair thinking, "I won't let this go, Marcus, but I'm not going to fight with words. I'll take control instead." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to buy the restaurant," David said firmly. "If they won't let me in, I'll own the place. Then I'll make sure no one else is treated the way I was." Marcus laughed lightly. "That's bold, David, but I shouldn't be surprised. You've always played the long game." "It's not just about me," David continued. "This is bigger than one bad night. I want to show people that places like Blue Moon can change. It can become a space where everyone is treated with respect." They spent the next hour discussing how to make it happen. Marcus gave advice, offering ideas about how to approach the current owners and check the restaurant's finances. David listened, jotting down notes as his plan began to take shape. By the time the call ended, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let this incident define him. Instead, he would turn it into an opportunity to make things better. As he sat in his quiet office, David thought about the future. He imagined walking into that restaurant, not as a guest but as the owner. The people who had judged him wouldn't know what hit them. David smiled to himself. Change didn't have to come through shouting or anger. Sometimes the most powerful move was staying calm and letting your actions speak for you. He stood up, ready to start the work ahead. This wasn't just about him, it was about creating a world where everyone belonged, and David was determined to make it happen. David didn't waste time. The morning after his conversation with Marcus, he called his team of lawyers and financial advisors. He explained what had happened at Blue Moon and what he wanted to do next. His voice was calm but firm. "I need your help to take control of this restaurant," he said. His team listened carefully, understanding the seriousness in his tone. They knew David was a man of action, and when he set his mind to something, he made it happen. The first step was simple but smart. Start buying shares. David's advisors began digging into the restaurant's ownership. They identified investors, tracked shares, and looked for weaknesses. Slowly and quietly, David began acquiring pieces of the restaurant through different channels. He didn't want anyone to know what he was planning until it was too late for them to stop him. "We need to move carefully," one of his lawyers advised during a meeting. "If the owners find out what you're doing, they might block the sale." David nodded. "Discretion is key," he said. "Let's keep this under the radar until we're ready to make a final move." While his team worked on the business side, David took on another task. He wanted to understand more about the restaurant's history. Why had it become a place where people like him were excluded? Who was responsible for the discriminatory policies? David spent hours going through records, reading reviews, and talking to people who had worked at or visited the restaurant. He discovered that Blue Moon had a long history of catering to the wealthy and powerful. Its exclusivity wasn't just about money, it was about maintaining a certain image, one that didn't include people who looked like him. As he dug deeper, David found stories from others who had been turned away. They had faced the same judgment, the same cold stares, and the same refusal to belong. The more he learned, the more determined he became. "This isn't just about one bad experience," David told Marcus during another phone call. "It's a pattern, and it needs to stop." Marcus agreed. "You're doing more than buying a restaurant, David. You're changing the message it sends to the world." David's next move was to find out more about the people in charge. He wanted to know who made the decisions, who set the policies, and who benefited from the exclusivity. His research revealed a small group of owners who were deeply invested in keeping the restaurant's image intact. "They've built a system that works for them," David said to his advisors during another meeting. "But that system needs to change, and we're going to change it." Step by step, David's plan came together. His team kept acquiring shares, slowly increasing his influence. At the same time, he worked on a vision for what the restaurant could become. He wanted it to be a place where everyone felt welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from. By the end of the week, David had made significant progress. He wasn't just buying a business, he was preparing to transform it. The pieces were falling into place, and he could see the finish line. David knew there was still a lot of work ahead. The owners wouldn't give up without a fight, and there would be resistance to the changes he wanted to make. But he wasn't afraid. He had faced challenges before, and he had always found a way to win. As he sat in his office reviewing the latest reports, David felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about proving a point, it was about creating something better, something fair. He wasn't just taking control of a restaurant, he was taking control of a narrative that had gone unchallenged for too long, and he wasn't stopping until he succeeded. David sat at the large wooden desk in his office, staring at the contract in front of him. It was official. He now owned Blue Moon. For a moment, he allowed himself to smile. The restaurant that had treated him so poorly was now in his hands. But this wasn't about revenge. David had a bigger purpose in mind. The first thing he did was change the name. Blue Moon was gone. In its place, he introduced Hamilton's legacy. The name was personal. It reflected his story, his values, and the future he wanted to build. "This isn't just a business decision," David said during a meeting with his new management team. "This is about setting an example. We're going to show the world what inclusivity looks like." His first public statement was direct and clear. He addressed the restaurant's history and his vision for its future. "Hamilton's legacy will stand for equality," he wrote. "We welcome everyone, regardless of their race, background, or beliefs. Discrimination has no place here." The announcement made headlines. Some people praised him, while others questioned his motives. But David didn't let the opinions sway him. He had a plan, and he was focused on making it work. Next, he turned his attention to the staff. He knew that real change started from within. He began hiring people from all walks of life, different races, cultures, and experiences. His goal was to build a team that reflected the world outside the restaurant's doors. In the past, the staff had been chosen to fit a specific image: polished, formal, and distant. David wanted the opposite. He looked for employees who were warm, welcoming, and passionate about making guests feel at home. During one of the interviews, a young woman shared her excitement about the changes. "I've always dreamed of working in a place where people are treated equally," she said. "It feels like you're creating something special." David smiled. "That's exactly what we're doing," he replied. The kitchen also underwent a transformation. David hired chefs from different cultures, encouraging them to bring their unique tastes and traditions to the menu. He wanted the food to tell a story of unity and shared experiences. "We're not just serving meals," David told the chefs during their first meeting. "We're creating memories. Every dish should remind people that diversity is something to be celebrated." The changes didn't stop there. David also reimagined the restaurant's interior. The cold, formal design was replaced with warm colors, comfortable seating, and artwork that represented cultures from around the world. He wanted every guest to feel like they belonged the moment they walked in. When the renovations were complete, David held a private opening for the new staff and their families. As he looked around the room, he felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of hope. "Thank you all for being part of this journey," David said as he addressed the group. "Together, we're going to build something incredible. This isn't just my legacy, it's ours." The following week, Hamilton's Legacy opened its doors to the public. The first guests were greeted with genuine smiles and warm welcomes. The food was a mix of tastes from different corners of the world, each dish prepared with care. People from all backgrounds filled the dining room, sharing stories and laughter. The atmosphere was nothing like the old restaurant. It was alive, vibrant, and full of connection. David watched from a quiet corner, his heart full. He had turned his pain into purpose. What had started as a personal fight against prejudice had grown into something much larger. This was just the beginning. David knew there was still work to be done, but he was ready. With every plate served and every guest welcomed, Hamilton's Legacy was proving that change was possible. The grand reopening of Hamilton's Legacy was the talk of the city. News stations, social media, and newspapers all shared the story. Everyone wanted to know about the man who turned a once exclusive restaurant into a place that welcomed everyone. David stood at the entrance, watching the crowd gather outside. Cameras flashed as reporters asked questions. He stayed calm, answering a few with short but meaningful replies. "Tonight isn't about me," he said with a small smile. "It's about what this place now stands for: respect, equality, and inclusion." As the doors opened, the first guests entered with curiosity. The new look of the restaurant surprised them. Gone were the cold, unwelcoming walls. Warm lighting, colorful art, and comfortable furniture had taken their place. Each detail had been chosen to make people feel at ease. Inside, the staff moved confidently, greeting everyone with smiles. The servers came from different backgrounds, reflecting the diverse vision David had set. Their energy added to the vibrant atmosphere. The new policies were simple but powerful. There were no dress codes to exclude people. Guests were treated equally, no matter their wealth or status. These changes were printed on the menus and displayed on signs near the entrance. One guest, an older woman in a modest dress, smiled as she looked around. "I never thought I'd step into a place like this," she said softly to her companion. "It feels like it's for everyone now." David had also invited several community leaders and activists to the opening night. He wanted them to see how Hamilton's Legacy was different from other high-end restaurants. He believed in giving people a platform to connect and share ideas, and this was only the start. The kitchen was another highlight of the night. Guests tasted dishes inspired by cuisines from around the world. Each meal told a story, combining flavors that celebrated diversity. The chefs, proud of their creations, explained the inspiration behind each dish to curious diners. Throughout the evening, the atmosphere was lively. Guests laughed, chatted, and enjoyed the food. People from different walks of life sat together, sharing tables and conversations. The barriers that once existed at Blue Moon were nowhere to be found. Midway through the evening, David took the stage to address the guests. He held a microphone, but his voice was steady and clear. "Thank you for being here tonight," he began. "This restaurant is more than just a business to me. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we let go of division and come together." The room fell silent as he continued. "For too long, places like this have been used to separate people. I wanted to create something different, a space where everyone feels welcome, regardless of who they are or where they come from. This is our chance to celebrate our differences and see the beauty in them." Applause filled the room as David stepped off the stage. He didn't need to say more. The guests understood what he meant, and they could see his vision in every part of the evening. As the night went on, David moved through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories. Some people shared how they had faced exclusion in other places. Others thanked him for creating something so meaningful. "This is just the beginning," David said to a group of young people who were excited to meet him. "I want this place to inspire more change, not just in restaurants, but everywhere." By the end of the evening, Hamilton's legacy had made its mark. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It was a statement. It showed that fine dining didn't have to be cold or exclusive. It could be warm, welcoming, and open to all. As David stood by the door, watching the last guests leave, he felt proud. The smiles on their faces and the conversations they had shared proved his vision was working. This wasn't just about one night. It was the start of something much bigger. David knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Change never was. But he was ready to keep building, one step at a time. Hamilton's legacy was more than a restaurant now. It was a movement, and David was determined to see it grow. The challenges for Hamilton's legacy were far from over. As the restaurant gained more attention, the pushback became stronger and more personal. David started noticing small but troubling signs of sabotage. One day, a server came into David's office holding a copy of a newspaper. "You might want to see this," she said, placing it on his desk. David read the article, his jaw tightening with every word. A well-known food critic had written a harsh review of the restaurant. The piece wasn't just about the food. It questioned the changes David had made. The critic described the new atmosphere as forced and the menu as trying too hard to impress. David shook his head. "It's not about the food," he said to himself. "They just don't like what this place stands for now." It wasn't just one review. Over the next few weeks, similar articles appeared. Most of them were written by critics who had loved Blue Moon. They painted David as a radical who had ruined an institution. Some even suggested he was using the restaurant to make a political statement instead of running a proper business. The negative press hurt. David had poured his heart and soul into Hamilton's legacy, and now people were trying to tear it down. He began to question himself. Was he pushing too hard? Could his vision really work in a city so rooted in tradition? One evening, David sat alone in his office, scrolling through the online comments about the restaurant. Many were supportive, but the hateful ones stood out. Words like out of place and trying to make a point stuck with him. Marcus called that night. "I saw the reviews," he said. "How are you holding up?" David let out a deep breath. "It's hard not to take it personally. They're attacking everything I've worked for." "Of course they are," Marcus replied. "You're challenging their comfort zone. Change is uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Don't forget why you started this." Marcus's words reminded David of his mission. He wasn't doing this for fame or approval. He wanted to create something meaningful, a place that welcomed everyone and stood against exclusion. The next day, David called a meeting with his leadership team. He shared his concerns, but also his determination. "I know this is tough," he said, "but we can't let the negativity stop us. This is bigger than one restaurant. It's about showing people that change is possible." The team agreed to focus on what they could control. They worked harder to perfect the menu and improve service. David also decided to host community events at the restaurant. He invited local artists, writers, and speakers to share their work, turning Hamilton's legacy into more than just a dining space. Meanwhile, David kept a close eye on the media coverage. He noticed a pattern. Most of the negative reviews came from critics who represented the city's elite. They seemed more interested in protecting their idea of fine dining than giving the new restaurant a fair chance. Instead of fighting back publicly, David chose a different approach. He invited some of the harshest critics to dine at the restaurant, offering them a chance to see the changes firsthand. Some accepted the invitation, while others ignored it. The ones who came were surprised. They saw the care in every detail, from the food to the atmosphere. A few even wrote follow-up articles, acknowledging that their initial reviews had been unfair. But not everyone could be won over. The whispers about David being too radical didn't stop. He knew there would always be people who resisted what he was trying to do. Despite the challenges, David found strength in the people who believed in him. Guests from all walks of life continued to fill the restaurant, sharing meals and conversations. Each smiling face reminded him that his vision was worth fighting for. One night, as he walked through the dining room, a young black woman stopped him. "Thank you for this place," she said. "It's the first time I've felt truly welcomed in a space like this." Her words stayed with David. They were a reminder of why he had started this journey. Yes, the price of change was high, but the rewards were greater. David knew the road ahead would be hard. The critics and whispers wouldn't disappear overnight. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. With every step, he was building something bigger than himself, a legacy that would stand for justice and inclusion, no matter the cost. David was always looking for ways to make Hamilton's legacy stand out, not just as a restaurant, but as a symbol of progress. One day during a meeting with his management team, the topic of a new head chef came up. "We need someone who can bring fresh ideas," David said. "Someone who can create dishes that tell a story." That's when he heard about Tasha. She was a young black chef with incredible talent, but had struggled to get noticed in a field dominated by white men. Her resume was filled with experience, but she had been passed over for top positions again and again. David decided to meet her. He invited her to the restaurant for an interview. Tasha walked in, her confidence shining despite the setbacks she had faced. She talked about her love for cooking, how she combined flavors from her grandmother's recipes with techniques she had learned in culinary school. "I want to create food that connects people," she said, "something that reminds them of home, no matter where they're from." David smiled. "That's exactly what we're about here," he said. "Welcome to the team." Tasha was thrilled, but she also felt the pressure. This was her chance to prove herself in a role that had always seemed out of reach. She dove into the work, experimenting with ingredients and crafting menus that celebrated different cultures. Her dishes were bold and full of flavor. Guests loved them, and soon word spread about the new chef at Hamilton's legacy. People came not just for the food, but for the story behind it. One night, David sat down with Tasha after a busy service. "You're doing an amazing job," he said. "The guests can't stop talking about your food." Tasha laughed, a little embarrassed. "I'm just happy people are enjoying it," she said. "It feels good to finally have a place where I can be myself." Tasha's success was more than just a personal victory. It showed what could happen when someone was given a real chance. For David, it was proof that his vision for the restaurant was working. But David wasn't just focused on the restaurant. He wanted to make a difference beyond its walls. He began meeting with other black business owners in the city, learning about their struggles and offering support. "There's so much talent out there," David said during one of these meetings. "We just need to create spaces where it can shine." He started funding programs for young entrepreneurs, giving them resources to start their own businesses. He also partnered with community organizations to provide mentorship and training. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they were making an impact. More people in the city began to see the value of supporting local businesses and embracing diversity. Back at the restaurant, Tasha continued to thrive. She introduced a special menu that featured dishes inspired by her own heritage. Each dish came with a story, and guests loved learning about the traditions behind the food. One evening, a woman approached Tasha in the kitchen. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "This meal reminded me of my mother's cooking. It brought back so many memories." Tasha smiled, her eyes shining. "That means a lot to me," she said. "That's what I want my food to do, make people feel something." David watched from a distance, feeling proud of what they had built. Hamilton's legacy was no longer just a restaurant. It was a place where people connected, where stories were shared, and where change was happening, one meal at a time. As the months went on, David continued to push for progress. He knew there was still work to be done, but he also knew they were on the right path. With Tasha leading the kitchen and the community rallying around their mission, the future looked brighter than ever. David often reminded himself of a simple truth. Real change started with small steps, and together, they were taking those steps every day. Elliot Sterling sat in his large empty office, staring at the headlines about Hamilton's legacy. The once proud owner of Blue Moon was furious. His restaurant had been the talk of the city for years, and now it was gone. Worse, people were praising David and his new vision for the place. "This can't be happening," Elliot muttered, slamming his hand on the desk. He couldn't believe how quickly things had changed. His wealthy patrons, the ones who used to flock to Blue Moon, now talked about David's restaurant as if it was the best thing to happen to the city. Elliot felt his influence slipping away, and he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Elliot started reaching out to old investors and regular customers. He invited them to private meetings, trying to convince them that Hamilton's legacy wasn't as great as everyone said. "It's just a trend," he argued. "People will get bored. Places like mine have always been the heart of the city." Some of them agreed with him, but most had already moved on. They didn't want to be associated with his outdated views. Frustrated, Elliot decided to take things further. He began spreading lies about Hamilton's legacy. He claimed the food wasn't fresh, the service was poor, and the business was failing financially. He even hired people to post fake reviews online, hoping to damage the restaurant's reputation. But that wasn't enough for Elliot. His anger turned into something uglier. His true feelings about David and the changes he had made started to show. Elliot began making comments that revealed his prejudice, blaming David's success on political correctness and saying the restaurant was only popular because of sympathy, not quality. He reached out to media outlets, trying to stir up controversy. Some reporters bought into his story and started publishing articles that questioned Hamilton's legacy. Headlines like, "Is this restaurant just a passing fad?" and "The truth about David Hamilton's vision" began to appear. On social media, Elliot's smear campaign gained some traction. He used fake accounts to spread rumors and even targeted David personally. The post questioned David's motives, accusing him of using the restaurant to push an agenda instead of focusing on good food. David, however, stayed calm. He had expected resistance when he started this journey. He knew some people wouldn't accept what he was trying to do. Instead of responding to the negativity, he chose to stay focused on his goals. When his team showed him the false reviews and online attacks, David simply said, "Let them talk. We'll prove them wrong with our work." His calm leadership inspired his staff. They continued to pour their energy into making the restaurant better every day. The food, the service, and the atmosphere, all of it reflected the hard work and heart they put into their jobs. David also made sure to remind his team why they were doing this. "This isn't just about us," he told them during a team meeting. "It's about creating something that lasts, something that stands for fairness and inclusion." Meanwhile, the lies Elliot spread started to backfire. People who visited Hamilton's legacy quickly realized the rumors weren't true. Guests shared their positive experiences online, drowning out the negative voices. Some of Elliot's former allies even began to distance themselves from him. They didn't want to be associated with someone who was so openly bitter and prejudiced. Despite all the noise, David remained steady. He didn't let the attacks distract him. Instead, he focused on expanding the restaurant's success. He worked on new initiatives, partnered with local farms for fresh ingredients, and supported more community events. One evening, as David walked through the dining room, he saw it was packed with guests from all walks of life. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was a reminder of why he had started this journey. Elliot's efforts to destroy David's work had failed. His anger and lies couldn't compete with the genuine connection David had built with the community. David knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be people like Elliot, trying to hold on to old ways of thinking. But David also knew that as long as he stayed true to his values, Hamilton's legacy would continue to thrive. With each passing day, David felt more confident in his mission. He wasn't just running a restaurant. He was building something bigger, something that could withstand any challenge. As Hamilton's legacy continued to grow, David became more than just the owner of a successful restaurant. He became a symbol of strength, of change, and of what Black success could look like in a world that often made it hard to succeed. People took notice, and soon David was invited to speak at conferences and on TV shows. Everywhere he went, people admired him for his achievements. They praised him for his courage in standing up against racism and for creating a restaurant that was truly inclusive. David was honored, but at times it all felt overwhelming. One day, after a long interview on a national talk show, David sat in his car, staring out at the busy city street. The weight of his new role had started to feel heavy. He had worked so hard to build Hamilton's legacy, and now it was much more than just a restaurant. He was carrying the hopes and dreams of many people on his shoulders. "I never expected all of this," he said to himself. "It's a lot to handle." But the more David spoke out, the more he felt the pressure. Every word he said was analyzed. Every decision he made was questioned. His life was no longer private. Journalists followed him, people sent him messages on social media, and everywhere he went, there were eyes on him. David used his growing platform to help others. He spoke about the challenges Black business owners faced and pushed for more opportunities for people who had been shut out of industries like his. He encouraged young Black entrepreneurs to keep going, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. But as the public spotlight grew brighter, David's personal life started to suffer. The constant attention made it hard to relax. Even when he was at home, he found it hard to escape the pressure. He felt as though he was always on, always expected to be a perfect example of success. He also realized that he had started to ignore his own mental and emotional health. He was so focused on the fight for equality that he neglected his well-being. The late nights, endless meetings, and constant travel wore him down. One evening, as David sat at his kitchen table, he felt a deep sense of exhaustion. He had spent so much time building Hamilton's legacy and fighting for a cause he believed in, but he hadn't taken care of himself. "I can't keep going like this," he thought. "If I want to keep helping people, I need to take care of myself first." It wasn't easy for David to admit this. For so long, he had pushed through every challenge without pausing to rest. But now he knew he had to make some changes. David decided to take a step back from the constant demands of his public life. He started taking time off from interviews and appearances. He also made time to reconnect with his family and friends, finding moments to relax and enjoy life without the weight of the world on his shoulders. He began seeing a therapist, someone who helped him talk through his struggles and find peace within himself. For the first time in a long while, David learned how to say no and how to prioritize his own mental health. In the quiet moments, David remembered why he had started this journey. He hadn't set out to become a symbol or a public figure. He just wanted to create a place where everyone, no matter their race or background, felt welcome. Now he understood that while external success was important, it meant nothing without inner peace. David knew he could continue to fight for change, but he had to find a balance. If he didn't take care of himself, he couldn't help others. With a clearer mind and a renewed sense of purpose, David returned to Hamilton's legacy. He was still driven by his mission, but now he also understood the importance of taking care of his own well-being. David had learned that the price of power wasn't just about the external challenges. It was also about finding the strength to look inward and care for the part of himself that needed rest and healing. He now knew that true strength came from a balance between fighting for change and finding peace within. One morning, David sat at his desk, reading through a letter from a large investment firm. They were offering him a huge amount of money to buy Hamilton's legacy. It was more money than he had ever imagined. The offer seemed tempting. With that kind of money, he could retire, live comfortably, and leave behind a legacy. But as he sat there holding the letter, David thought about everything Hamilton's legacy stood for. This restaurant was not just a business to him, it was a symbol of change, equality, and opportunity for people who had been left out for too long. He couldn't sell it. Instead, David decided to take a different path, one that would make his vision even bigger. He reached out to other Black entrepreneurs who shared his passion for inclusivity and equality. Together, they came up with a plan to open more Hamilton's legacy locations, not just in the city, but across the country. "We need to take this vision and spread it everywhere," David said in a meeting with his new partners. "This is about more than just a restaurant. It's about showing that businesses can succeed while being diverse and inclusive." Everyone in the room agreed. They wanted to give others the same opportunity David had, an opportunity to succeed without being judged by the color of their skin or their background. They all believed in the power of community and the strength that came from working together. The first new location opened in another city, and soon more followed. Each one carried the same values that Hamilton's legacy had started with. They were places where people from all walks of life could come together, share a meal, and feel welcome. David's decision wasn't just about making money, it was about continuing the work he had started. He knew that by opening more restaurants, he could impact even more people, especially those who had faced the same struggles he had. As the new locations began to open, David became busier than ever. He spent time traveling between them, making sure each one stayed true to the vision he had set. He was still the driving force behind the chain, but now he had a team of like-minded people to help him. Despite all the hard work, David couldn't help but feel proud. Hamilton's legacy was no longer just a single restaurant. It had become a movement that showed people that success didn't have to come at the cost of fairness or equality. One evening, after a long day, David walked into the original Hamilton's legacy. The familiar sounds of laughter, conversation, and clinking silverware greeted him. The restaurant was packed, as always. It felt like home. David stood by the door for a moment, taking it all in. He remembered the struggles, the doubts, and the battles he had fought to get to this point. He had come a long way from the day he was turned away from Blue Moon, but he knew the journey wasn't over. The fight for equality and opportunity was ongoing, and there was still so much work to do. As he looked around at the people enjoying their meals, David felt a sense of peace. He had made a difference, but there was more to be done. David smiled to himself. His journey had come full circle, but this was only the beginning. The fight for equality and inclusivity would continue, not just in his restaurant, but across industries and for generations to come.